The strange part wasn't what Leonor said this week. It was what she didn't say. During that military event in Zaragoza, reporters kept trying to push questions about her personal life, and for a split second, you could actually see her expression change. Not angry, not uncomfortable, just guarded. And honestly, that tiny moment stayed in my head longer than the official headlines did. Because it made me realize something I think a lot of people are refusing to admit. What if Spain's future queen never truly gets the freedom to marry purely for love? Not because she doesn't want to, but because monarchy itself makes that almost impossible. And the deeper I think about Leonor's future, the more I realize this story isn't really about romance anymore. It's about sacrifice. Not the fairy tale kind people post on TikTok edits. I mean real sacrifice. The kind where your personal happiness quietly becomes secondary to national stability. And honestly, that's a brutal thing to ask from someone who's barely in her 20s. If you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe. I post every day. Because I genuinely think Leonor's life is becoming one of the most fascinating examples of how modern royal pressure actually works behind the polished images. And here's my hot take right away. I don't think the palace fears Leonor falling in love. I think they fear her falling in love with the wrong kind of freedom. That's the part nobody says out loud. Because people still talk about royal romance like it's a Disney movie with better uniforms. But modern monarchy doesn't operate on emotion first. It operates on risk management. And the future Queen of Spain represents too much institutional value for her private life to ever be completely private. That sounds cold. Because it is cold. But look at history honestly for a second. Almost every royal family that lost control of its public image paid for it heavily later. Some lost influence, some lost credibility, some nearly lost the monarchy itself. So when people ask, why does the palace care who Leonor dates? I think the real answer is, because they're not evaluating a boyfriend. They're evaluating future stability, and that changes everything. Now compare that to someone like Prince William and Catherine in Britain. Their relationship worked partly because Catherine adapted into the institution instead of trying to overpower it. That matters more than people realize. Meanwhile, when royal relationships become centered around personal celebrity, emotional rebellion, or constant media warfare, institutions start panicking fast. And honestly, I think Spain watched all of that happen across Europe very carefully. They learned from it. That's why Leonor's public image feels so controlled right now. Disciplined military training. Structured appearances, minimal emotional exposure. At first, I used to think it was just traditional royal strategy. But now, I think they're preparing her psychologically for something much bigger. A life where personal choices will always carry political consequences. And here's the uncomfortable truth most fans don't want to hear. The future husband of Spain's queen won't just affect Leonor emotionally. He'll affect public trust in the crown itself. That's an insane amount of pressure to put on one relationship. Imagine trying to fall in love while knowing newspapers, politicians, social media creators, historians, and millions of strangers are all evaluating your compatibility in real time. Honestly, how do you even separate genuine emotion from public expectation at that point? I don't know if it's possible. And this is where I think Leonor's story becomes very different from celebrity culture. Celebrities can reinvent themselves constantly. Royal heirs can't. A bad relationship doesn't just become gossip. It becomes constitutional anxiety. That's why I keep noticing how carefully the palace manages even the smallest rumors around Leonor. Nothing feels accidental anymore. And when stories do leak, I pay attention to how they leak. Because selective visibility is one of the oldest palace communication strategies in existence. People think royal PR is about hiding information. Sometimes it is. But more often, it's about slowly conditioning the public emotionally before major transitions happen. One photo, one headline, one carefully timed appearance, until suddenly the public feels emotionally prepared for an outcome. That's why these conversations around Leonor's future relationships matter more than people think. They're not just gossip cycles. They're public testing grounds. And honestly, I think Leonor herself understands that now. You can see it in the way she carries herself lately. More composed, more aware, almost like she understands every gesture is being archived for future judgment. That kind of self-awareness changes a person. And this is where I need to say something slightly controversial. I actually feel bad for young royals sometimes. Not because they're privileged, obviously they are. But because their emotional lives stop belonging entirely to them very early. Imagine being 20 years old and already knowing your future partner must also fit institutional expectations. Not just family expectations, national expectations. That's enormous. And I think people underestimate how isolating that must feel. Because even if Leonor falls deeply in love someday, there will always be another voice in the room, the monarchy itself. That invisible pressure never leaves. And here's where modern audiences make things even harder. Social media changed royal life completely. Now relationships aren't just analyzed by journalists. They're dissected frame by millions of strangers online. One awkward body language clip becomes a global narrative overnight. One cold facial expression turns into relationship trouble headlines. And honestly, I think the palace knows emotional spontaneity has become dangerous. That's why Leonor's public interactions often feel measured instead of carefree. Not robotic, just cautious, very cautious. Because one uncontrolled narrative can spiral internationally now. And this is where someone like Mr. Beast weirdly becomes relevant to the conversation. Hear me out. Mr. Beast understands internet psychology better than most billion-dollar companies. He knows modern audiences are emotionally driven by continuity, storytelling, and perceived authenticity. Royal institutions are finally realizing the same thing. That's why Leonor's image has shifted from protected princess to young woman growing into responsibility. It's a smarter narrative for 2026. But it also creates a dangerous paradox. The more emotionally connected audiences feel to Leonor, the more emotionally invested they become in her future love life. And that creates pressure from both directions. The palace wants stability. The public wants romance. Those two goals don't always align. That's why I think the idea of marrying for love becomes incredibly complicated in royal systems. Love alone isn't enough. Compatibility with the institution matters. Media endurance matters. Public perception matters. Political symbolism matters. And honestly, that sounds exhausting. Sometimes I wonder whether Leonor secretly envies ordinary relationships. Like imagine seeing normal couples argue privately, fail privately, recover privately. Meanwhile your future relationship could influence headlines across Europe. That's not normal human pressure. That's historical pressure. And here's something else I've learned. Watching royal families for years. The institution always thinks long-term. Always. While social media thinks in hours, monarchies think in decades. That's why the palace likely doesn't care about temporary online excitement around rumors or shipping culture. They care about durability. Can this relationship survive 10 years of scrutiny? 20 years? A constitutional crisis? Public scandals? Political instability? Those are the questions royal institutions ask quietly behind closed doors. Not, are they cute together? And honestly, once you understand that, Leonor's future starts looking very different from the fantasy people project onto her. Because she may eventually face a heartbreaking choice every royal heir secretly fears. Choosing between emotional freedom and institutional duty. And history suggests duty usually wins. Not because royals are emotionless, but because the weight of expectation becomes impossible to ignore forever. That's why I think Leonor's generation of royals faces a unique challenge. Older monarchies survived on distance and mystery. Modern monarchies survive on emotional connection. But emotional connection invites emotional curiosity. People now expect access to royal personalities, relationships, vulnerabilities. And once audiences become emotionally invested, they start feeling entitled to answers. That pressure can quietly reshape personal decisions over time. Which brings me back to the original question. Could Spain's future queen actually marry for love? Maybe. I hope so, honestly. But I think the deeper truth is this. Whoever Leonor chooses will also need to be someone the monarchy believes can protect the future of the crown. And the moment love becomes tied to institutional survival, it stops being completely free. That's the hidden reality behind royal life people rarely talk about. The crown gives extraordinary privilege. But it also quietly negotiates away ordinary freedom. And watching Leonor navigate that balance in real time may become one of the defining royal stories of this generation.